I felt a surge of dread as I opened the official-looking envelope, my heart sinking deeper with every word. A lawsuit, filed against my 8-year-old daughter Sophie for excessive and disruptive noise. My hands trembled in disbelief. Who could be so heartless, so cruel, to sue a child whose only crime was singing joyfully in her own backyard? Sophie was my world. A bright, beautiful girl whose autism made communicating with words challenging. But through music, she found her voice. Her joyful songs were her way of connecting with a world that didn't always understand her. Now, someone wanted to silence that voice, punish her for the innocent melodies that echoed softly between our backyard trees. I read the plaintiff's name, Angela Holloway, a woman I'd never formally met, but whose harsh reputation had spread through our quiet neighborhood like wildfire. A cold anger took root inside me, replacing shock with steely resolve. Angela was suing my daughter, unaware of one crucial detail. She'd just picked a fight with the new HOA president. She thought rules gave her power, but I would show her that true authority came not from enforcing silence, but from protecting the voices of those who most needed to be heard. Sophie filled every corner of our home with vibrant life and endless wonder. At 8 years old, she saw the world differently, a magical place of patterns and melodies that others often missed. Her autism shaped the way she interacted, turning ordinary moments into extraordinary discoveries. Every afternoon, Sophie would sit in our backyard, gently tapping her colorful, custom-made xylophone, her eyes sparkling with delight as each note danced through the air. To Sophie, music wasn't just sound, it was her lifeline. Words sometimes tangled in her mouth, stubbornly refusing to come out clearly. But when she sang, her voice rang out confidently, bridging the gap that separated her from everyone else. Her little concerts drew butterflies to our garden and smiles to neighbors' faces. Many afternoons, I'd stand at the kitchen window watching her, my heart swelling with pride as she serenaded the flowers, her small frame swaying in rhythm. Despite life's challenges, Sophie's spirit remained undaunted, her laughter infectious, her determination fierce. She was beautifully unique, illuminating even the darkest days. Little did she know, though, that someone nearby resented the very songs that brought her so much joy. Someone determined to silence her music forever. Angela Holloway was infamous in our neighborhood, though I'd never directly crossed paths with her until now. She was the kind of woman who thrived on control, whose meticulously manicured garden and perfectly maintained brick home stood as monuments to her obsession with order. Every blade of grass on her lawn seemed to stand at attention, and neighbors whispered anxiously whenever she approached, fearing they'd broken some obscure rule in her book of endless regulations. Tall and slender with razor-sharp cheekbones and steel-grey eyes that seemed perpetually narrowed in judgment, Angela radiated an unsettling intensity. She moved through the neighborhood, as if conducting an inspection, notebook in hand, jotting down infractions as minor as misplaced recycling bins or shrubs that dared grow an inch too high. Her voice was polite but cold, her tone laced with condescension, making clear her belief that perfection was not just attainable, it was mandatory. Stories of her cruelty were traded like cautionary tales at neighborhood gatherings. An elderly neighbor once tearfully recounted how Angela had publicly humiliated him for allowing his grass to grow too long after hip surgery. Another described her ruthless insistence that children's sidewalk chalk drawings constituted vandalism. But until I opened that lawsuit, Angela had merely been a distant figure, a harsh rumor, nothing more. Now, staring at her neatly typed name beneath the words plaintiff, I realized that Angela Holloway had turned her judgmental gaze toward my family, marking my daughter's joy as an offense she refused to tolerate. A sharp knock at my front door startled me from preparing Sophie's afternoon snack. Wiping my hands hastily on a kitchen towel, I opened the door to find Angela Holloway standing there, her expression rigid and disapproving. "Can I help you?" I asked cautiously, sensing trouble in her icy stare. She lifted her chin slightly, eyes narrowing. "Your daughter," she began without introduction, "has been making an unbearable racket. This neighborhood has clear rules about noise." I felt a surge of defensiveness rise in my chest. "Her name is Sophie," I replied firmly, "and she's just singing. It's how she expresses herself. She has autism, Angela. Surely you can understand." "Her condition," Angela interrupted sharply, "doesn't exempt her from following community standards. Frankly, her screeching disturbs everyone." My jaw tightened, anger rising hot beneath my skin. "Sophie isn't screeching," I said through clenched teeth. "She's singing, and it's hardly loud enough to bother anyone. Perhaps you could show a little compassion." Angela scoffed, folding her arms. "Compassion? Allowing one child to disrupt the peace for everyone else is not compassion. It's negligence. Fix it, or I'll have no choice but to take action." With that, she spun around abruptly, heels clicking sharply down the walkway. I stood frozen, fists clenched, my pulse pounding. As I closed the door, I turned and saw Sophie peeking cautiously from behind the living room curtain, confusion and hurt shadowing her eyes. "Am I in trouble, Daddy?" she whispered softly, breaking my heart. The next HOA meeting was tense from the moment Angela arrived. I watched quietly from the front table as she strode confidently into the community center, her expression stern and determined. Clearly unaware of my role as the new president, something I'd quietly stepped into after the previous president had retired, she took her seat and immediately demanded the floor. Rising with practiced authority, Angela's voice filled the room. "As you all know, excessive noise disrupts our community's peace. Unfortunately, some residents feel entitled to disregard our rules." Her gaze swept around the room, stopping pointedly near me. "I've already warned one family repeatedly. Since they continue to ignore our regulations, I have officially filed a lawsuit." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, visibly uncomfortable. My jaw tightened as anger simmered within me, though I forced myself to remain calm. Angela smiled coldly, satisfied she'd asserted dominance. "We have rules for a reason," she finished smugly, sitting down as if awaiting applause. Clearing my throat, I stood, facing her squarely for the first time. "Thank you, Angela. Now, as HOA president, let's talk openly about the kind of community we truly want to be." The lawsuit papers arrived on a rainy afternoon, delivered by a solemn-faced courier who seemed hesitant to meet my eyes. As I unfolded the heavy documents, each page felt like a physical blow, hitting harder than the thunder rumbling outside. The words, excessive disturbance, public nuisance, seeking damages, blurred before my eyes as disbelief gave way to fury and grief. A quiet gasp drew my attention to the doorway. Sophie stood there clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and anxious. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling, "is something wrong?" My throat tightened painfully, but I forced a reassuring smile. "It's nothing, sweetheart," I lied softly, tucking the papers behind my back. But her gaze lingered, sharp enough to sense my distress. "I'm sorry if my singing makes trouble," she murmured sadly, her voice breaking slightly as tears welled up. "I'll be quiet from now on, I promise." My heart shattered at her apology. Kneeling down, I gently embraced her. "You haven't done anything wrong, Sophie," I whispered firmly, holding her close. In that moment, my sadness hardened into resolve. Angela had no idea whom she'd chosen to battle, but she was about to find out what happened when someone threatened my daughter. Determined to protect Sophie at any cost, I immediately installed discreet security cameras around our property, carefully positioned to monitor every angle of our backyard. Each morning, anxiety tightened in my chest as I reviewed the overnight recordings, hoping desperately there would be nothing troubling to find. But it didn't take long before Angela's true colors appeared vividly on screen. One chilling afternoon, the camera captured her approaching the fence separating our yards. She leaned over, her expression twisted in contempt, and harshly scolded Sophie, who was quietly singing and playing her xylophone beneath the oak tree. "Stop that hideous noise right now!" Angela hissed venomously. "Nobody wants to hear your shrieking. You're ruining everyone's peace." Sophie flinched, visibly frightened, her small shoulders trembling as she dropped her instrument. My stomach churned painfully at the sight. Anger surged through me like fire, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. This was the proof I needed. I meticulously saved each damning video clip, assembling an undeniable record of Angela's cruelty. Every recording strengthened my resolve. She might think her position in the neighborhood gave her power, but she had underestimated how fiercely a father would fight to protect his child. The next HOA meeting buzzed with tense whispers and wary glances. Angela arrived early, head held high, her confidence almost tangible. Clearly believing she had the upper hand, she strode toward the front, prepared to speak first. But as she approached the podium, her eyes widened in surprise to find me already seated there, calmly waiting. "Excuse me," she said, voice tight and irritated. "Only board members are supposed to sit at that table." I stood slowly, facing her directly. "Actually, Angela, I am the new HOA president. It seems you missed the last several meetings, or you'd already know that." The color drained from her face instantly. Stunned silence filled the room as neighbors exchanged astonished looks. Angela's mouth opened slightly, but no sound emerged. Her composure shattered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty and embarrassment. "That's impossible," she stammered weakly. You're the one who's ignoring the rules." I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady. "Angela, the only rules being ignored are those of basic human decency. You have bullied and intimidated not only my daughter, but many others here. I've seen the footage of your behavior firsthand." Murmurs erupted around us, neighbors nodding vigorously, their faces tight with anger toward Angela. "You made a serious mistake," I continued firmly, eyes locked on hers. "You assumed your cruelty would go unchecked. But from today, you will understand clearly. Our community protects its children, and we stand against those who threaten them." Angela stepped backward, realizing perhaps for the first time, she was completely alone. The room erupted in a passionate wave of voices, neighbors quickly standing one after another, recounting their own painful encounters with Angela. Mr. Bennett, a soft-spoken retired teacher, spoke first, his voice steady despite visible emotion. "Angela once threatened me with fines because my grandson's wheelchair ramp supposedly disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic," he confessed, eyes glistening. "We felt unwelcome in our own home." Mrs. Rivera stood next, her voice trembling with anger. "When my mother was ill, Angela complained repeatedly about the ambulance lights disturbing her sleep. She made a difficult time unbearable." Each story struck deeper, uncovering a pattern of cold-hearted cruelty hidden beneath Angela's veneer of community leadership. As neighbors spoke, an overwhelming tide of empathy filled the room, dissolving any lingering isolation I'd felt. Sophie, who sat quietly beside me clutching her stuffed rabbit, watched wide-eyed, realizing for the first time how deeply our community truly cared. Angela, isolated in her corner seat, shrank visibly under the weight of her neighbor's righteous anger. Gone was the confident, intimidating figure who had terrorized us. In her place sat someone small, exposed, and finally held accountable. By meeting's end, a clear message echoed through the community hall. Angela's reign of intimidation would no longer be tolerated. One by one, neighbors approached Sophie and me, offering apologies, support, and reassurance. The community I'd feared might abandon us instead embraced us warmly, united by compassion and justice. For the first time in weeks, Sophie smiled genuinely, comforted by the realization that we were not alone. The courtroom felt oppressively quiet, tension hanging thick as Angela confidently approached the witness stand. Her expensive suit was immaculate, her posture deliberately composed. She recited her rehearsed testimony smoothly, painting herself as a victim forced to endure relentless disturbances. "I've repeatedly tried reasoning with my neighbor," Angela declared theatrically. "But they refused to respect our peaceful neighborhood. My only recourse was to take legal action." My lawyer stood calmly, projecting video evidence onto a large screen. A collective gasp filled the courtroom as Angela's cruel, distorted face appeared clearly, captured in vivid detail, shouting harshly at Sophie. My heart clenched painfully at the fear visible in my daughter's small frame, her innocent singing silenced by Angela's venomous words. Angela's composed facade shattered. Her eyes darted nervously around the courtroom, searching desperately for sympathy that no longer existed. Neighbors who'd gathered to show their support for Sophie watched silently, eyes blazing with quiet outrage. Witness after witness rose to speak. Mrs. Rivera tearfully described Angela's callous disregard for her mother's medical emergencies. Mr. Bennett, voice steady and dignified, testified about Angela's attempts to dismantle his grandson's wheelchair ramp. Each story built a devastating portrait of a woman driven by heartless enforcement of trivial rules over basic human kindness. Finally, it was my turn. My voice shook slightly, but my gaze remained firm. Angela Holloway didn't just target my daughter for singing. She targeted her very right to joy, to expression, to exist peacefully within our community. Sophie deserves better than this. The judge listened carefully, visibly moved. As Angela desperately tried and failed to defend herself under cross-examination, it became clear she had severely underestimated the consequences of her cruelty. After hearing all testimony and reviewing the evidence, the judge leaned forward solemnly. "I've heard enough. It's abundantly clear who the real nuisance is." Angela stood rigidly, her composure dissolving as the judge delivered his verdict. His voice, stern and unwavering, echoed through the courtroom. "Ms. Holloway, your actions display a troubling lack of empathy and have deeply harmed your community. Your lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, you will pay court costs and damages, and you are ordered to attend mandatory sensitivity training." Her mouth opened in stunned disbelief as whispers rippled through the audience, but the judge wasn't finished. "Let me be clear. Neighborhoods thrive through compassion and understanding, not through cruelty disguised as rule enforcement. Consider this a firm warning. Harassment in any form will not be tolerated." Angela's shoulders sagged visibly, humiliation etched clearly into her face. The neighbors who once feared her control now watched quietly, their relief palpable. As Angela exited the courtroom, she avoided everyone's eyes, stripped of the authority she had wielded so heartlessly. Outside, Sophie slipped her small hand into mine, squeezing softly. "Did we win, Daddy?" she asked, hope brightening her eyes. "We did, sweetheart," I replied, feeling immense relief wash over me. Angela had sought to silence Sophie's joy, but instead, she'd unwittingly united an entire community against cruelty and lost everything in the process. A month later, our community gathered in the neighborhood park beneath strings of glowing lights and colorful banners, celebrating Sophie's victory and the unity we'd discovered. The air filled with laughter, conversation, and gentle music, a joyous contrast to the recent tension we'd endured. As twilight fell, Sophie stepped nervously onto a small stage, holding her cherished xylophone. Her eyes met mine, seeking reassurance. With a confident nod from me, she began to play, her delicate voice blending beautifully with the gentle melody she created. The crowd fell silent, captivated by her performance. Warmth filled my chest as neighbors smiled and applauded, openly embracing the music Angela had tried to silence. Afterward, countless neighbors approached, praising Sophie's bravery and talent and promising unwavering support. Watching Sophie beam proudly, surrounded by newfound friends and genuine acceptance, I knew we had not just survived, we had triumphed, transforming our pain into something powerful and beautiful. Later that evening, after the celebration ended, I tucked Sophie into bed, gently brushing back a strand of hair from her smiling face. Her eyes were bright, filled with a newfound confidence born from community acceptance and love. Quietly, she reached up and touched my cheek. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think Angela will ever like music?" I paused, deeply moved by her innocent compassion. "I don't know, sweetheart, but maybe someday she'll learn to listen. Not just with her ears, but with her heart." As Sophie drifted peacefully to sleep, I reflected on our journey. Angela's cruelty had wounded us deeply, yet it had also united our community, teaching us a powerful lesson: that true harmony comes not from silence or strict rules, but from embracing each other's differences. In that moment, I promised myself to continue protecting and nurturing Sophie's joy, because every voice deserves to be heard, especially one as beautiful as hers.